into the next part of our session, which is perception, but kind of like on a larger scale instead of just how it affects one individual and their self. So perception is the way sensory information is organized, interpreted, and also consciously experienced. And so one of these is the attribution theory, which is very associated with perception. It's how we explain behaviors of others and events around us. And so this is broken up into internal and external side. So internal is with a dispositional attribution, which is when they believe that the behavior of others is due to an individual's personality. And then the external or situational attribution is when they believe that someone's behavior is due to perhaps the external event environment that they're put into. And it is quite common that most or a lot of people have the fundamental attribution error, which is what some theorists believe in the past, which is when a person puts more weight on internal causes rather than external causes when trying to explain another person's behavior. On the other hand, though, when we consider our own behaviors, we are more likely to blame them on our environmental factors and kind of view ourselves as victims of the circumstance instead of blaming it on our internal factors. So Kelly's covariation model goes over different factors that might help influence this weight of whether it is an internal attribution or an external attribution. And so she uses consistency for time, distinctiveness of the situation, and consensus, like the amount of people influencing this weight. So so when consistency is high, it tends to be an attribution to internal factors. And when I say consistency, it's like in an example where you have a friend who constantly has this same behavior of maybe being late, right? We know then, or because of this consistency, it's kind of just attributed that that individual, that friend's personality is just being a latecomer to a lot of the events and not quite planning for time. So then this is something that tends to attribute to their personality. But then on the other hand, for distinctiveness, this is when, let's say that you have another friend that is always nice and has the same personality, but when they're put into a different situation, maybe there's a big party or something's happening, and then they start to kind of have a different behavior of maybe they start getting angry or something like that, then you would kind of attribute that to perhaps them being in the party, which you would then attribute as an external factor. And then consensus of people is when multiple people are doing that same behavior or that same outcome. So you could say you're a student that's late for school, and a bunch of other of your classmates are also late at the same time, and it could be due to a late bus or something like that. And so we know then that's an attribution to the external factors or that late bus or traffic on the highway. But also, this is just a side note that the fundamental attribution error tends to occur more in individualistic cultures, which is Western to Europe or America, who place an emphasis on individual achievement, compared to collectivist cultures, which are Eastern or Africa or Asia, where they believe that success is attributed to external factors and that their failure is attributed to internal factors. So it's kind of an opposite of their views in these aspects. And then there is also the theory of the dramaturgical approach, which uses the metaphor of a theater to understand social interactions. So people are assumed to act in accordance with the expectations that they have an audience watching them, right? So Irving Goffman in 1940, he was the one that studied the nature of people's interactions and noticed that people planned the way they act, and also that people wanted to control how they're seen by others and they tended to act differently alone than in public. So they kind of put on a persona in front of the audience or the rest of the people that they meet with. And so that is, in a sense, the front stage when people are in a social setting and acting for an audience by putting up a front or doing a different kind of representation of themselves. On the other hand, there's the backstage. So, at the back of a theater when people are getting ready and everything, but it's associated with the private area of our lives. So when the act is over and you can be yourself, so this is like your true self. And it also happens to be a training period. So time to get ready for impression management, which is the next term, which is our attempt to control how others see us on the front stage to be seen in a positive way. And also just wanted to mention that for impression management and with the term of front stage, people are allowed to have different front stages. So like, even if you're thinking as a student, right? You're a student on one hand, but you could be involved in other activities like you could be like a captain of a sports team. And so you would kind of act a little different there than, let's say, if you're trying to impress your teacher to get get a recommendation from him for your for any kind of like internship or a job that you're applying to, so that they could help you with that. But just that we have different front stages that sometimes people have to act differently for. And for these front stages, we are the ones that are trying to control how others see us and prepare for those kind of instances. And also, going on from kind of how we view others or want to present ourselves in front of others, there is the term of bias, which is the tendency to think in certain ways. And so cognitive biases often cause deviations from a standard of rationality or just, good judgment of how we view others. And so the actor observer bias is kind of similar to the fundamental attribution theory, which is when we are victims of external factors, but behavior of others is attributed to their internal factors. So yeah, that's that. And then the self-serving bias is, if we succeed, it's due to our internal or personal qualities, but if we fail, it is likely due to things outside of our control. And this occurs more in individualistic cultures because of the belief that success is because of that individual personal quality, and also is a focus for increasing that self-esteem belief. And then optimism bias is the belief that bad things happen to others, but not to us. And primacy bias is when the first impression is more important than later data. It's because first impressions are long, strong, and easily built upon. And so they're very that first impression really matters for most. And then there's also, on top of that, recency bias, which is when people place a lot of emphasis on your recent actions or recent performances more than the ones before then. So that's usually once you've gotten to know the person and interacted with them more. Okay, so now we're going to go into stereotypes, which is cognition. it's an aspect of cognition. So stereotyping is attributing a certain thought or cognition to and overgeneralizing a group of individuals. So an example of a stereotype is that people who wear glasses are smarter. That, it's just a stereotype, and there are different ones throughout, ones that I guess different people know about. And they can involve, race, gender, culture, religion, even sometimes shoe size. So it's sometimes a little bit random, but the disadvantage of stereotyping is that it tends to be commonly inaccurate, but the advantage on how we view it is that it allows us to rapidly assess large amounts of social data so that you can kind of quickly narrow down certain ideas in the top-down processing or bottom-up processing that we kind of, analyze situations. And stereotype threat is the fear that one will be evaluated based on a negative stereotype, which happens to be self-fulfilling most of the times when people who have this negative stereotype are told about it. So here, a negative stereotype surrounding a task can actually, cause a decrease in the performance of an individual performing that task and end up leading to a negative consequence, or tending that those individuals will fulfill that negative stereotype. And then there's also self-fulfilling prophecy, which is when stereotypes can lead to behaviors that affirm the original stereotypes. And then we're going to go into a little bit of prejudice, which is the assumption or an opinion about someone simply based on that person's membership to a particular group, which is also commonly associated with race, ethnicity, social class, status, power, and prestige. Something also worth it to note about status is that there are different types. So there's the ascribed status, which is the status given at birth. So, if you were born a prince or in the caste system, you are kind of born at a certain level, certain status. So that would be associated with that. And achieved status is a status that you earn for yourself through the hard work that you put into it. So, in different countries, you are able to do that and kind of change your status based on how much effort you put in. And then there's also master status, which is the status or trait that you believe has more importance than the other statuses that you may have. So that one defining master status. And prejudice is often due to the fear of frustration. And so this leads up to that next term, which is scapegoats, a group of people towards whom the aggression is directed. So an example of scapegoats were Jews during World War II, and they're often seen at times of economic hardship. There's also the idea of the frustration aggression hypothesis, which is a little bit more emotionally based. And when someone's frustrated, it tends to turn into aggressive impulses. But the hypothesis is that when you bottle all of this up, they transfer the aggression somewhere else, and often towards acting out to minorities because their original ideas of what they would do are not socially appropriate. And then there's also a hypothesis of relative deprivation, which is the upsurge in prejudice or discrimination when people are deprived of something they feel entitled to. So, this frustration and deprivation leads to kind of more prejudice or discrimination towards others. And so we're going to go into another question. Here we have 50% saying choice B and 50% saying choice C. Okay, so this answer choice is choice C, the answer, sorry. So the question says, Joe sees the new student in his class come late. He believes that this is unacceptable and believes that the new student is irresponsible and lazy, which concept best explains Joe's perception of the new student? So I guess that my example kind of related to this, but so the answer is C, the fundamental attribution error, because as I kind of mentioned before, the fundamental attribution error has a similarity with the actor observer bias that was mentioned in that question, where the fundamental attribution error focuses more on people believing that other people's actions are due to their personality or their internal attribution more than external causes. But I would say like the actor observer bias goes a step further by saying that individuals themselves attribute most of their like bad behavior due to external factors. So because Joe is seeing that this new student is late in his class, he believes that it's because of his personality, as we can see in this question, that the student is just irresponsible and lazy. But it is possible, that the student could have came late because of other external factors, which he doesn't quite think about when he's automatically like thinking about this person's lateness. On the other hand, for stereotype threat, it's more so about if they have a negative stereotype associated with a certain like group. And if someone was to mention to someone of that group this particular stereotype, so let's say it could be something like, like women run, or just maybe like a women would perform a little more poorly on a certain test that they're giving just because of other factors, and then the test proctor was to say that to one of the women taking the test, and then that would impact them to most likely do badly on that test because they were told that extra information, rather than if they were just to have taken the test blindly, that most likely would not have happened. So that's kind of what stereotype threat is, where you have this negative stereotype associated with someone, and then they're also being told that before they perform the action, which eventually usually causes like a negative consequence that kind of fulfills that stereotype that others have. And then front stage is associated with, how people present themselves in front of the audience or the outside world. And then primacy threat is not quite exactly a term. The other one was actually primacy bias. So just a thing to know there.